Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to introduce you today to Alex Trochut, who is a graphic designer out of originally Barcelona, but currently living in California. And he has done really amazing work working with very famous brands. And would I be right to say that the kind of the signature medium with which you kind of work is typography, right? And a lot of a lot of beautiful work came out of you playing with that.
Hi, yes, I guess you can say that. I think that's where a lot of things meet for me, like illustration and abstract and letters are a combination of both things for me, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. So, would you mind just telling us a little bit about how did it all start? How you got into design, and just a little bit of your background. Fast forward then to where you are right now.
Right. Yeah, I think I was always like a kid that enjoyed drawing. It was a place where I could get lost, I guess, when I was a kid and just play with colors and shapes and always being obsessed with filling up every little corner of the paper with details
Mm-hmm.
and equally bad student. So it was kind of like this combination of not very motivated for studying, but very motivated for drawing the books that I should be reading. And then, like I finally I convinced my parents that I wanted to do graphic design, and they agreed. And then from there, I studied in Barcelona in Elizaba.
Mm-hmm.
I did 4 years there. I did 1 year in Berlin with Erasmus,
Oh, cool.
and then after that, I spent a couple of years working on a branding studio called Turmix,
Mm-hmm.
Barcelona, which was quite a very different approach. I think like Turnics are crafters, but also mostly great thinkers. I would say they sort of have a very rational way of looking at a project, understanding communication from a point of view of like, let's just talk about what we're gonna do before we
Mm-hmm.
do it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just talk about the idea, and that was kind of like very formative for me. But also I think my process is much more based on let the process tell you what is it going to be. There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the idea of facilitating happy accidents, and
Mm-hmm. And
wanting to kind of like find a surprise yourself also with that process. And for me it's always much more difficult to synthesize ideas and concepts from just talking about them. I think I need to make in order to understand what I'm going to do. And then, like after staying in Barcelona for a few years working for different studios, I started to do my own practice as a freelance. I moved to New York, stayed there for 10 years, and now I'm here in California working at the Apple design team. And it's um, it's going back a lot to the core of graphic design and a very very democratic process of working with a big team. So it's I think I've been going a little bit back to where I started in a certain way, but also kind of like keeping trying to keep a little bit your own sort of like identity in within a bigger corporation.
mm-hmm. Do you still have time to do some of your personal projects on your free time, or
I
not?
try. It's very difficult because there's not a lot of time. That it's a job that requires a lot of your time. It's very very difficult. But if there's certain conditions that have very generous timings, and I'm also happy to work on those, then we can make it work sometimes. But it's nothing like any advertising deadline or anything like that that is demanding. It needs to be some sort of like special project that the client is very flexible, and we both understand that we're going to do our best to accommodate each other.
Wonderful. So it's collaborative, right? And
Yeah, yeah, a lot. Yeah,
wonderful.
more with friends than actually, clients that are very strict, and of course that they have their needs, and you cannot, fulfill them if you have a daytime job. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Wonderful. So when you were mentioning at the beginning that for you it's kind of difficult to think of ideas or concept just by talking. You're kind of more of let's do it, and the idea probably unfolds along the way. So could you share a little bit more about your process on that front? I mean, if there is, let's say, a brief or a right that you need to kind of work with, what is your process until the idea crystallizes and you're ready to communicate what you would like to create?
Right. Well, it's you're in a different moment every time you receive a brief, and I think in that moment you are also a different. Your brain searches for different things. It's affected by different sort of like maybe goals and ideas that you've been in touch with that you would like to express. So there's always a little bit of that sort of mix of like what I am right now and the ask that I need to perform. And and then I guess like it's about finding a way to have fun in that process and try to find a way to please the client and also please myself in that process. So it's hard to say. I also try to be very provoke a different method if I can, because that also maybe sparks new results. Um, if there's something very clear though, like if there's something that okay, this is what we need, and it's based on that you have done before, then there's none of that. We just become very effective, and we'll just do that. But when there is a little bit this more open brief, yeah, I like to kind of like see where things go and not have a clear solution at the beginning, because sometimes even if you want to finish fast, there's something that takes me away from that, and I always want to complicate myself by okay, but what about we do it differently? And so yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you end up doing something that kind of like wants to break with a little bit what you've done before.
Yeah, so you like to experiment and you like to play, right? When there is an opportunity for that.
Yeah, I think so, because it's very nice when there's something that it's basically you don't expect, and when there's like this idea of a surprise in the process is kind of like the most rewarding thing. It's actually what makes you motivate yourself into wanting to discover what's the final result, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like reading a book. It's like I want to see what the end is, but it tells you a new story. And I think like sometimes when you're very good at a technique or a process, it's like, oh, I read that story before. I know how it ends, and maybe it's a nice story, but it's not that surprising. So yeah, you always want to kind of like be surprised, I guess.
Yes, that's very well said, right? Because it's sometimes that being that it's nice to get into creative and to enter the creative flow, but even that can become sometimes something that gets you stuck, because if you always do the same thing all the time, right? There's no newness, nothing new will come out, right? So you always need to enter it like as a new adventure.
Yeah, I think so.
And does typography still remain as your main tools in tool in graphic design, or are you experimenting right now with other formats?
I think in the end, there's kind of like quite a gravitational pull towards letters, not really typography, because I don't even use a typography software for systemizing like an alphabet or anything like that. I've done like display typography, but not really like proper analysis of what a typographer does.
Mhm.
But I love lettering, and I think that gives me like a lot of freedom to create some sort of sweet spot between an image and a text, and making the people look at an image and then solve a text later, and creating that game with the reader is something that I enjoy a lot. And maybe you just make them look first and then maybe they discover something. So that's something that I enjoy always in many different techniques, because that sort of format allows you to work with many ways. It could be simple as a vector, or it could be complex as a render, or a video or anything like that.
So you leave space not only for yourself to get surprised in the process, but also for the viewer, right? To be surprised when they're looking at your work. Sounds like
Yeah,
that.
hopefully. I mean, it's always like it's never 100% of the audience that kind of wants to play, or that wants to, or that can read what you're trying to say. But I think, yeah, that's what makes me like more excited to just communicate maybe with less people, but make them more excited maybe to look at something. Yeah.
Yeah. It was very interesting to see on your website that you worked on NFT projects.
Hmm.
Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that experience? You know, how did it how did you like it at that time, and how do you see right now in this current climate? How will this digital art form expand further?
That's very interesting. I think where when I was attracted to NFTs was more from a point of view of like allowing digital creators to do something that was more for an art audience, and creating something that would be an expression that was not for commercial use, but for a context of art that could live
Hmm.
in a screen, in a gallery or a home, and looking for that element of self-expression that would be not design, and looking for something that it's a difference between art and design, but it could be digital, of course. And I was really looking forward to cultivate that, because it seemed like the market was looking for that.
Hmm.
um, in the end, what I think it happened a little bit to me, I mean, I not at all like I got very deep into it, and I sold some NFTs, and I didn't sold some others. But mostly I felt like the market pivot more towards creating products rather than art, so, and that's a whole different set of like idea that I felt like, yeah, that's not really much for me in that sense. um and you need to kind of like, yeah, the idea of like, okay, let's produce maybe 100 or 1,000 um images, that then, and you need to create a community, and there was all this sort of like product behind it, that while at some point I entertained the idea and I was excited to maybe think about which ways we could maybe do something like that, I felt like it was a little bit, I was starting to lose a little bit my own self into that process. Like, oh, I'm working for a new sort of industry now, that it's not really
Hmm.
um, my thing. And but yeah, I think still, I'm being very, very disconnected. It's been like maybe 4 years since like I first looked into the NFTs, and right now I don't know much about it, so I don't know what it is. What I was very interested was more into that idea, but the idea of art, but I'm not really sure that it's much what's happening. I'm not sure. Yeah. If I'm
Hmm.
honest, I don't know.
Yes. Yes, at the time when it all became kind of pretty hot, if we can say so, I was also very, very interested in it and looking into it. And indeed, for it to work, I think the primary purpose is really to make a commercial um, driven idea behind that, right? It's not just art for the sake of art. You need quite a lot of marketing to make it work, right? So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Like also, yeah, you had to do the work itself. It was only a small percentage. You had to do so much promotion,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
create a community, and then become very. There's something about social media and creativity that I struggle a lot with because it's the idea of constantly having to feed the machine with
Mm-hmm.
quantity, and that quantity it's the way to get the algorithm happy, of course, and get exposure, but that sometimes doesn't pair very well with quality. So some artists are managing to do it very very well, and I have absolute admiration for the ones that you see quantity and quality at the same time. I just can't, and
Mm-hmm.
my work it's much less uh, yeah, capable of multiplying itself in big numbers. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a little bit the reality. But yeah, it's a very different place from where I started. For example, when I was like in 2000, early 2000s, I remember promotion was very centralized by websites, and it was
Mm-hmm.
like QVN, I think it was the name of the website. Or there were like some, there was like a few set of like places where people would go for inspiration, and and then people were producing on a year basis, maybe few good projects, and that was what was feeding the machine. But these days it's kind of like a completely different game. It's much more harder and competitive, and yeah, it's I feel very very lucky that I was starting at the time that I did, because
Mm-hmm.
the circumstances were working much more in my favor the way that I do things. I don't know. Today it would have been very different. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, it's the options out there are very overwhelming, and I think a lot of creative people are finding it hard to really find their true voice and style when like you no longer even know, what is true that's being published.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a sort of a saturated place to swim in, and you really need to be stubborn to kind of stick to your way, right? If you want to have some kind of signature style, yeah. Do you use AI at all in your work these days? And if,
Uh, I mean, I have a very complicated relationship with AI.
mm-hmm,
I I have I find it very useful for writing because it's
mm-hmm,
not my thing. So the tasks that are difficult to me, it helps me to make them simpler. Having, for example, when you access an information, it's very quick at not distracting yourself in the website. It's just like, oh, I want to go from point A to point B, I go there.
mm-hmm.
When it comes to the creative process, I think that it could be a very useful tool to generate ideas, but I use it more kind of like it's like almost creating a mood board of sketches that they are kind of like giving you, maybe just it's a spitfire of ideas, but yeah, nothing to. I hate AI as a tool for output, that final output. I think for me it's so contrary to the self-discovering process of creativity, and what um, you as a creator, you don't want to kind of like outsource your imagination,
Yes.
and these things are something that creates a, I think, a false self fuck, false um, sense of achievement, because
Mm-hmm.
you are creating a little bit, the output is so overwhelmingly good that you might, just feel a bit defeated as a creator too, and kind of like constantly reminding yourself that maybe, like, yeah, this looks great, but I really didn't do it, so it kind of like puts you in a position of not being very confident about yourself too. I don't know. I hope that craft finds ways through the cracks, because it's true that also AI does this very good averaging of a canon of aesthetics that is like the general
Mm-hmm.
mood, and it's very good at crafting and executing very well that. But I guess maybe this will drive society, creative communities, to develop styles that were not really in the average, and like kind of like maybe look for more grotesquely human aesthetics, and something that it's just way more contrarian to what the general tapestry of results is. So yeah, I'm very curious to see what it goes through. But yeah, AI, it's not a tool that I enjoy a lot. It gives me a little bit of anxiety, and to me, I need to make to understand software like 3D. It's a software that it's complicated to use, but you put the points together in your mind. You learn through hours and hours, and just prompting something. I like to make. I don't like to use text to
Mm-hmm.
well, not in that way, but
Yeah, I understand.
I like to draw, not to write my ideas mostly. So for certain people, I understand it's an incredible tool. I just hope it doesn't become the general standard in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does remove, doesn't that train your creative muscle that well, right? It's sort of you become pretty lazy.
I think
Or and yeah.
you could become a little bit lazy, maybe, but at the
Mm,
same time, I guess you could also. I don't know. It's just so hard to for me to have a clear position towards it, because I want to be open about it, but also I can see how it could be very easily, creating this sort of lesser clever or skilled creative in the future. I don't know. Maybe it's a different kind of creator, because it's a kind of creator that maybe is more of a writer, or
mm-hmm,
that has it's an incredible thinker, and the
mm-hmm,
craft is not that important. But for me, I've always been a crafter, so it's taking away what I enjoy in a certain way. It's like I that's the part that I like to get dirty and have fun with. I don't want the
mm-hmm.
machine to do it, right? So yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
I understand. Um, and what type of tools do you then enjoy using the most these days?
What Apple tools
Which tools in general do
in
you
general?
for your creative process?
Yeah, I use, like, it's crazy how much, like, at the beginning of from 2003 till 2015 was mostly vector and Photoshop for me. And then in
Mhm.
2015, I started to work with 3D a little bit, and then little by little, it's been an additive process that you never end. And 3D is like a tool that you will never hit cover all the parts that it offers. It's inhumane to do that. But
Mhm.
there's a adding more and more and more tools and sub tools that can help you in many different ways. So right now, I think it's everything from like some VR sculpting to Procreate to iPad, working with Nomad, uh, doing so many different tools provide you with so many different results. And I think that's also something very incredible about the digital era, that it gives you like this sort of like superpowers of like, oh, okay, we can do this way and that way, and if we combine them, it's another way. And so it's very exciting to be in this time with technology. But yeah, I would say mainly vector and 3D are my tools.
Yeah, it sounds like for you, you need that canvas, right? Whether it's digital canvas or paper canvas, it's like that sort of space where you can connect things and experiment, and maybe that's what AI is not able to provide you at the current moment, right? So that's why you kind of, there's no space, like freedom and space there for you to play with. It's not a very
Yes, you were talking about that. Yeah, I guess AI, and there's tools like Crea that
yeah.
allow you to draw, and then it kind of like generates something based on your drawing. Uh, just I
But that then it takes over your creative process, right? It's no longer
Yeah,
you doing that.
yeah. I think it also comes down as a little bit of your own satisfaction as
Yeah,
a
exactly.
creator, and I think that takes a little bit the fun away for me. So
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like, I don't know. It's like, I don't know if like in the future we'll become more like a professional hobbyist. It's like, obviously, you could do this better if you do it in another way, but maybe you enjoy, like, oh, I don't want to touch the software. I like to go on a synthesizer and just play with the knobs and
Yeah,
do Ableton. It's like, okay, that's your choice, I guess. But
yeah,
uh, yeah, I guess it's just for your own satisfaction at this point, which is very important for the process and the final result for me. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's most important that that tool that you choose to work with is not a blocker, right? But it's more an enabler for your ideas and creativity to flow. And if you're not resonating with it, then that's not your tool.
Yeah, exactly. Because
Yeah.
there's something that transfers at the end, your emotions and your sort of
Mm,
like engagement with that sort of like game that you're playing. And
mm-hmm.
if it's a good game, it's gonna be a good result in the end.
Exactly.
But yeah, I understand capitalism, productivity, they play a big part. So it's like at what moment we will trade off productivity and speed for that other element that it's more internal for you, and how it means a lot more for you if you've done it in a certain way rather than another. But we'll see. I'm very curious to see what happens in the next years.
Yeah, I think what you touched a very interesting point here, and I think a lot of people actually are already questioning that, and in a way, searching for that more deeper alignment with who they are, what they really enjoy. So there is that quest already going on, maybe not yet on a very big scale, but a lot of people that at least we work with, I think they are questioning, the purpose of these tools and sort of how not to get yourself lost among them, but still maintain the creative um, control, if we can say so, even if that word doesn't work with creativity that much. What is creativity for you? I'd be curious to know how do you see the whole creative process, like your relationship with that, and your personal self-expression in that.
Yeah, I think in a certain way creativity is getting lost in for me in a moment, and being on a space that is almost like some sort of space of connection with another part of your mind. And when it's the most magic is when the mind is not thinking really, it's just acting on responses that don't really come from your conscious self. It just comes from somewhere else, and it clicks, and then you just kind of like just getting to a new place without you driving the wheel, no, like it's just something that takes you there, and that's what it's the most magic thing about it to me. Yeah,
Yeah, we call it the creative flow. I don't know if you
exactly
yeah,
creative
you could
flow, of
just
course. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
you just tune into it and you go, right? That's the beauty of it. It's like when a surfer gets on a nice wave, that's sort of
that's it, and the world stops and you don't think, and
yeah.
time goes by, and you time travel a little bit in a good.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very important, right, to choose the tools and your environment that enable you to kind of get activated in that way. Because if the tools are sort of too complicated, then you just it's going to be a counter effect, right? Counterproductive.
Yeah, that's very true. I think I struggled a lot with that with at the beginning when I was working with 3D because I didn't have control over the tool. So the that flow was completely interrupted. It's like I don't. It's a very complex tool. I don't control it, and then I'm just skimming the surface. And
Mm.
before I was getting very frustrated with the tool that I really controlled because it was simpler. I was going very deep with it, but the output, the result, was becoming very repetitive. So my motivation was not being fulfilled by the results I was achieving. So I felt like I need to change a tool to get to better results. But then, there's always that moment of um, the learning. Some people
Yeah,
are much better at learning than others, and some people are very good at absorbing fast, and that's a skill that if I think like the creative of the future is a creative that kind of have like this incredible symbiosis with technology, because the skill of I wonder, I always say like what will happen to Pablo Picasso if he was born in the
hmm,
century, what how all this raw, pure, primal artistic self, how would it had thrived here? Would it have thrived? Maybe that kind of person would not be the person that would
exactly.
think, oh yeah, I'm gonna just do this and that. I mean, of course we're talking about a very particular artist, but I'm just talking about a generic idea of a creative. Uh,
Hmm.
with the tools, the brains of the tools that were used in the early 20th century versus the early 21st century, very different, and also different skills in your brain. So I guess like the code, the software of the creative needs to be very different. We have the same hardware, but the software, yeah, really matters.
Yes, yes, it's very true. Very true. Um, are there any artists that you admire these days that use like technology in the way that you think is
Mhm.
like future oriented?
Yeah, I think if I have to name one, I would say Jonathan Zawada
Hmm.
is a creator that has from a code perspective, um, artistic with brushes, pencils, video, AI, like you name it, sculpture. He has touched almost every medium in a very genuine, unique, surprising way, and I really, really, I think he deserves much more recognition that that he's got. I mean, he works with incredible projects, but you're always surprised how there's not like a clear correlation sometimes between the audience that is driven towards certain artists versus others, um, based on their talents. And I think Jonathan is it's probably one of the most brilliant ones that exists these days to me. Yeah.
Hmm. Wonderful. And what type of medium would you like to explore that you haven't touched yet?
Um, I mean, I always daydream that I will have some days, some time to just work more on personal projects, and I did personal projects in the past. I did some exhibitions here and there,
Yeah, I saw
um,
that. Hmm.
and I'm happy with them because they happen. But I always had the feeling of I would like to. mm, I wish I had more time to be more satisfied with the final result. I felt like exhibitions are great deadlines to push you to finalize
Hmm.
something. And when you work as an artist, like, meaning you're just trying to please yourself, very hard to put an end to it. No, so it helps.
Yes.
But when when these exhibitions happen, I always feel like I look back and I could see the things that maybe I could had improved and done differently. And I wish someday, I will be able to have the time and the space to make those things be just my full dedication. But yeah, it's not something that I'm seeking right now, though.
Okay. And what type of art then you would be working on,
Um,
ideally?
I guess I would love to combine a little bit what would be the making digitally of like something, but then material output, I guess, and like physical output in some way. My skills are more in the digital software. Um, so I don't think I'll be able to just kind of like, I would do things analogically and like, but I would love for the final output to be something that is not contained on a file. I would like to create something that is physical, whatever
Mm-hmm.
that means.
Interesting. Um, and since you were born, right, and studied in Barcelona, so coming from the Catalan culture and then moving to US, right? East Coast, West Coast, that's also has its nuances and
Yeah.
differences, right? How do you think your personal identity has transformed, right, through these sort of transitions, and how has that affected your work?
Um,
What have you maybe
mhm.
acquired when moving to US, and what have you let go that you thought maybe was not so useful from your personal culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think professionally, I was kind of like mm, made in Barcelona in
Mm-hmm.
many ways, but my sort of like persona or the persona that I became because it was the persona that I maybe wanted to be was more done in the States when I went to
Mm-hmm.
New York. I think for me it was important to start with in a new place with without your how you're perceived from others,
Mm-hmm.
family, friends, without the weight of the past, and just having that sort of like, okay, this is a new canvas.
Yeah, I
So
understand.
I think New York was definitely my school of life in that sense, and I would be very happy that I spent there the time that I did. And then here in California, I feel like it's almost like it's so nice to be back on a bigger team because I always
Mm-hmm.
worked alone for almost 20 years, and then now I work on a team that it's like the whole team is about 500 people. So
Oh,
it's
well.
it's um it's a big team. We have, of course, our there's a subset of smaller teams
Mm-hmm.
that we work with in different projects, but it's a big constellation of many different talents, and and everybody is like is very driven by creating the best work of their lives, as
Nice.
Apple's motto is, and it's very inspiring to be back on a bigger sort of like a big boat with a big crew,
Mm-hmm.
and being very inspired by everybody. So I think in that sense, it's been a very good experience professionally, but also a great experience personally to be part of a creative community that as a freelance, there's a certain isolation that comes with it. And you're very used to be the only one replying to a conversation with a client or something like that. And here it's like a very different dynamic, and I think it's a good growth element into my life. So I think it's been very positive.
I understand that. Yeah, I also went through this similar experience,
Oh yeah.
so yeah, I can connect with you. I think a lot of creative people, especially freelancers, have this, how do we say, point of view that, like doing your thing and doing your work, it's kind of it,
Yeah.
it's freelancing is the only way,
Mhm.
and I also believed in that for quite a long time. But then at some point there was like a real experience also working in a team, and you feel like you can really learn so much more, like, and just being in that supportive environment kind of also uh, makes you grow in a very different way, right? So
Yeah.
going freelancing for the sake of freedom, right, is nice, but that freedom is also can be very limiting, right? At some point in your life when it comes to growing, and it's difficult to do it on your own.
Yeah, that's very
So
true. Because you're like sometimes very dependent on your own capacities for reaching certain
exactly.
expectations, and it could be exhausting in that way. But also, in the other hand, like yeah, working on a team, it makes you see what you're good at, rather than
Mm-hmm.
like there's in a big team, everybody pushes on their best strengths, and
Mm-hmm.
and really helps you to understand which ones are those, because yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you're a freelance, you need to do everything, and you're always obviously not great at all of them. So yeah, here it kind of like surfaces a little bit what are your strengths rather than your weaknesses.
Beautiful, right? So that's also very empowering. And how do you find inspiration? How you mentioned that in early days there were a few places on the internet maybe to look for inspiration, right? But sort of inspiration on new things. How do you satisfy your curiosity most of the time?
Yeah, I'm sort of like a very kind of lazy researcher in that sense. I things that just appear into my feed are the things that I look at, and there's no much other than that. I feel like I'm I'm obviously we're exposed to so much, but it's sometimes it's not what you look at, is what you see. So I think
Mm-hmm.
um, I think we have a lot to absorb, and I don't particularly curate my eyes with this or that. I just let whatever Instagram is feeding me, and I go into the website, and maybe I look at Pinterest or any inspiration website. If I can, I go to some exhibition. I love that, because of
Mm-hmm.
the pace, that the context of contemplating something in a museum or a gallery. It's a very different mindset that when you're
Yeah.
scrolling and experiencing art through a tiny screen, kind of like the saddest expression that an artist could hope. It's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's in a little phone. But most of the things that we see is through this screen. So, but yeah, it's about the ability of like how you see the possibilities of what that is, and how you can extract something valuable for your own art.
Mm-hmm. So, like working at Apple, right? It sounds like you like more light was shine on your strengths, on your superpower. How would you then articulate that? What that is?
Well, we figure it out every day, like
Something new.
because it's always like the creative process. It's very democratic and very kind of like fluid, and also um, every project kind of like changes teams, and I realized that at Apple, really takes time till you kind of like create this sort of like team building. I guess it's like any team in sports. You want to
Mm-hmm.
almost have this sort of like Football Club Barcelona, like you pass the ball without looking at each other, no? Like you create
Mm-hmm.
this game, and that takes time, no? Till you kind of like develop all those things. I could say that things are getting better and better with time going by, and yeah, it's mostly I think working with elements of graphic design and software, but trying to find an element of expressivity within the bigger picture that Apple is in the whole ecosystem,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, trying to present useful ideas that are like beautifully presented. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that a lot of creatives and designers are dreaming of working at Apple, right? Is there anything that you could recommend for them? How to grow their career or what to work on within themselves so at some point they could be hired there and to have that dream job that you are having?
Yeah, um, I see a lot of people that sometimes they the way that you get exposed sometimes is through personal projects, and even personal projects that I find it very interesting that sometimes they are based. If you are an Apple fan, I see like a lot of people creating hypothetical representations of an Apple product in software, in UI, and in in animations, and I think yeah, that gets seen. You know, like we
Mm-hmm.
are creatives inside that look outside, and that always kind of like has a um, yeah can have an audience from Apple. So that's something I think I've seen it work sometimes. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I also think that the most pure expression of a creative it's from personal work many times. So that's the essence that a team wants to hire many times. It's like, oh, okay, this person has a vision, and even if you have it sometimes if you work for a client, and then that gets diluted sometimes because it's a middle point between you and the client, right? But
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I think mostly I would think for any job or any career development, always I think follow your heart, because yeah, that's for creativity I think is more important than anything else.
Yes. Yeah, find that gives you that creative flow, right? And do good work, I guess. The creatives, the work speaks the best.
Yeah,
Yeah, beautiful. Uh, if you had to leave one visual seed behind, right? An artwork, some a typographic gesture, or an idea, what would that be that you'd be satisfied with?
I guess I don't know. Probably the the highest hope will be to inspire others to create. You know, whatever you're doing that makes others be motivated to follow the same path, or like not the same path, but like to find their own through something that they got inspired by you or something like that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. It was very nice to get to know you, and I we are very also excited that your work is included in our design cards collection. So
Oh,
we'd
nice.
love to also send you the printed version as a gift. You know,
I
to
love to
you.
hear.
So yeah, and I wish you then all the best with working on interesting projects that you are working, and then at some point have more time for these personal experiments
Thank you
when
so
it matures, right?
much. Yeah.
It's always about the right time for this.
Yes, indeed. Time is the master. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.